Hey everyone, it's Dylan and my father from the Black Forest Wood Company, and we're back this week for part 2 of our Salt Lake City series. And this week we're doing the dining table and the benches. First, we're going to start off with the full construction of the dining table and move on into the 2 benches. And at the end, we're going to do the full delivery into our client's incredible home in Salt Lake City. So something kind of funny that happened throughout the process of this is I didn't realize that the benches went with the dining table until we actually got to the client's home. Everyone else at the shop apparently did because they were the same length, and that's just kind of common sense. But I had it in my mind that these were like some entryway benches, but they're not. They're matching and they go with the table, and that makes a whole lot more sense. So what Jack and Curtis are doing here first is beginning by cutting down this large slab of Bastogne walnut to the size that's going to fit in the mold. We're doing kind of a river/cast. It's not really either of them. We're putting the large section of the slab almost offset to the right side of the mold, and then these smaller narrow strips are going to go tight against the other edge. So it's going to be about 2/3 wood in this table and 1/3 resin. And my favorite part about this is just the grain in the Bastogne walnut. As you can already kind of see, this particular piece is heavily figured. It's got this rare type of figure called beeswing figuring. I don't exactly know what causes it, but it almost gives like a geometric pattern to the figure. It forms in these straight horizontal lines that look really nice in the finished product. So first, we start by flattening this slab on our Avid CNC machine to get it nice and flat so it sits perfect in the mold. And then there's a whole lot of debarking to do on this slab. These pieces especially had a lot of decay on the outside edges, so we had to go at them for quite a while with the wire wheel to ensure that we got all of that off. It can be problematic if you don't remove all of those decayed sections. They do look really neat, and they're tempting to want to leave in there. But what we found is that they're too porous, and if you do leave them in, any of those sections where you have that really soft wood, you just get a whole big mess with a ton of bubbles in there. And then once we've got all the slabs completely cleaned up, we can get them onto the forklift and lift it upstairs to begin putting them in the mold for the pour. Something important we do to ensure the success of every pour is we have a completely dedicated pour room built. And essentially it's just an insulated and air-conditioned room. And we've also taken like pretty much every precaution we can to reduce the dust in here. So we spray foam insulation the roof, but then we noticed we had issues with little bits falling off from our fans. So as you can see, we have this netting system put up there just to catch any dust that falls from the ceiling. And the air conditioning is just an effort to stop the overheating of the resin that occurs. And the other big component of this pour room is the water-cooled pour tables that we have. So they look just like white plastic right now, but beneath that sheet of the plastic is a 1/4-inch sheet of aluminum with all copper tubing running through it. And then we've got a little chiller and a reservoir that sits in the corner and essentially just circulates chilled water beneath it.
I hate symmetrical stuff.
I think like if it's a book match slab and it's a river right down the middle.
We are losers.
Sorry, I'm gonna get all the numbers first and then point out how I got them.
I think you actually need to do a quick review on Pythagorean theorem.
I used that once for a mold actually, for figuring something out in here, okay?
I actually do quite a bit.
Okay, so here we got the table. These are all the rough measurements that I took going along that way. These are the rough measurements I took going along this way. And then that gives me the average width for this, average width for this, and then this is the length. I multiply this times 0.75 to get the thickness, and then I divide it by 62 to get liters, and then I divide it by 15 to get buckets. And then you got buckets.
So after Garrett's explained how to perfectly calculate all the resin, then we can begin to put our pigment in. So we're using some of our Black Forest pigments in here, the metallic pigments, in combination with some of the Color Effects dyes. And the reason for adding in dye as well as metallic pigment is just so we can ensure that this base layer is going to be completely opaque. This pour that we're doing right now isn't going to get poured solid all the way through the table. It's just going to be about a 1/4-inch base layer, and reason for that is so that you can still see the outline of the live edge in the finished table without completely obscuring it or hiding it with all this pigmented pour. And then once we have everything mixed up, we can begin to pour this base layer in the mold. And The pouring technique is relatively simple for this. Really, the only thing that you need to be careful of is not to drip any of this pour on the live edge that's going to get done in the clear pour. Just because this is so concentrated in its pigment, it can kind of leave a stain in some cases. Worst case scenario though, if it does happen, you can wipe it up right away and generally it'll be fine. And then this pour happened on a Friday, so by the time we came back in on Monday, it had already cured up to the point where we needed to sand it before pouring the next layer. So the sanding just ensures that you kind of get rid of that really smooth surface and essentially gives your base layer a texture and something for the top layer of resin to grab onto. Another critical component though, if you are going to sand the resin, is to make sure that you're wiping it down with alcohol or something afterwards, just to ensure that you get all of that dust off the surface. And now for our top layer, we're going completely clear. It's about a 2-inch pour that we're doing here for the remainder of this, because I believe these slabs were just around 2 inches, maybe a little thicker at 2 1/4. And this can all be poured in a single shot by using our Black Forest deep resin in combination with all the steps and precautions that we've taken in our pour room. Generally with our deep resin, you can pour 2 inches thick with not many precautions at all, just a simple fan. Once you do get over that thickness though, then that's where it gets really important to begin adding the cooling. And if you have a base layer like this, something important to consider is that that acts as an insulator. So although we're only doing a 2-inch thick pour over that base layer, it prevents the cooling effect from the mold beneath and kind of causes the resin to hold more heat in there. And then after curing for 7 days in the mold, we can get this piece popped out of the form. And generally it's pretty simple to get these pieces taken out. We use tuck tape over MDF for the sides, and that releases very, very easily. And then the bottom sheet of HDPE usually just takes a few wedges and it pops right off. And then once we've got the piece demolded, it's time to bring it downstairs and back onto the Avid CNC machine for more flattening. You will notice that we did over pour here for the resin pour, and that is intentional. It's so that we can completely fill all the cracks and voids in a single shot without having to go back and fill them afterwards. And this may sound like it's a waste in resin because it all gets machined off, but it does make sense for our shop since, you know, we have a lot of overhead costs and labor is one of our most expensive costs. So it ends up being cheaper in the long run to pour that little bit more resin and save ourselves many, many hours of filling. Then it's time to get the piece size down to its 12-foot by 5-foot final size, and we are using the track saw for this. And like I always mention, it's just important to go in multiple passes just to get that nice clean cut down the edge. Now, hypothetically, we could have used our big panel saw to do this because it would have been able to do it in a single shot, but it's just kind of a heavy table to put on that big sliding fin. So that's why we opted for the track saw here. And from there, we can begin laying out for the pockets that are going to accept the leg plates for this table. So this is something that's probably unnecessary. Well, it is unnecessary. It's simply just to recess those plates so that you don't feel that little 6mm lip underneath the table. But we do it just so everything looks nice and clean when you're looking at the table from the bottom side. And we do need to be kind of careful here with the size of these pockets, because if you were to make them the exact same size as the plates that were going into them, you'd probably run the risk of cracking the table with the expansion and contraction that would take place. Typically, solid wood over, let's say, a 12-inch span can experience about an 1/8 inch of contraction. So with the 5-foot wide table here, we might experience more than 1/2 inch of expansion and contraction. But for that reason, we usually go about 4mm bigger in all directions for our top plates, just to allow for that expansion and contraction. Now, this client does have a very large family, and this is going to be their daily dining table. So they wanted to ensure that they had the absolutely most durable option that could go on. So for that reason, we suggested the acrylic urethane for this piece. It does, let's say, build up more of a layer over the piece of wood and slightly reduce the clarity that you can achieve compared to an oil finish, but it is the most durable option because it's resistant in terms of liquids all the way up to sulfuric acid. So there's not really anything that our clients could, let's say, spill on this that's going to ruin or damage the table. And while it's not scratch proof, it's highly scratch resistant. So to really get any noticeable damage on this, you'd have to intentionally try to scratch it. Now, because this client is going to have lots of people sitting around this table at all times, they've opted for the X base. Not only does this base look really nice, it's our most popular base, but it also allows for a lot of functionality in terms of seating around the table. So because of the design, the shallowest point or the narrowest point of this base ends up being right around knee height. So there's not really anywhere that you can be positioned around this table where you're going to be hitting your knees or hitting your legs, which is really convenient if you do end up having lots of large gatherings or have a large family, because you don't have to carefully plan where all the chairs are going to go. So we are using solid Canadian ash as usual for this base, and the reason is that we're going to be applying a blackened finish on this later, which before doing that, we wire wheel the wood, and ash is one of the best species for that technique because after wire wheeling, it really accentuates the grain and gives a nice textured finish. Then once we've cut all the joinery for these pieces, we can begin assembling them using Titebond 3 and solid hardwood dowels. Once we've got everything assembled and sanded up, it's time to take this base upstairs and begin the finishing process. So like I mentioned, we're putting a blackened finish on this. So we first begin by staining the piece, and we are using a water-based stain, which is going to go beneath an oil-based top coat. So usually that kind of, let's say, breaks one of the general rules of finishing that you shouldn't combine water-based and oil-based products. The reason we do it is just because we found we haven't been able to get another oil-based product to get quite as black as this water-based general finishes dye stain. So in order to ensure that we have success doing this, we usually have to wait about 1 week after applying the stain to go over top of it with the clear coat of oil, which isn't the end of the world for us, because for the table finishing, we have to wait 1 week for the urethane to cure before we can apply our ceramic anyways. And once the base is all finished up, we can begin installing the top plates that are going to go in the recesses you saw us cut earlier. So the top plates are pretty simple. They're just laser cut steel that we have slotted holes in. I guess the slotted holes are one of the key features of this top plate that is going to allow for that expansion and contraction. So not only do we have the recess in the tabletop being bigger than the top plate itself, but all of those holes that are going to allow the top plate to attach to the underside of the table are slotted so that when the table does expand and contract, it actually has somewhere to go and it isn't going to just put a bunch of pressure on those fasteners. For the fasteners, we're using threaded inserts because they allow for really easy assembly and disassembly of the table. Some tables you'll see, they'll just be screwed together directly into the wood, which will probably hold fine the first time, but as soon as you go and take that table apart, you've stripped out all those holes and you're really going to weaken the connection. Now, before you guys get to see this dining room set all finished up, we have to build the matching benches that are going to go along with the table. So we're also using Bastogne walnut for these pieces, and they're going to be done in a cast, these ones, where they're going to have walnut to the outside edge of the benches and then resin to the inside edge of the bench. And like the dining table, we're doing the base layer technique as well. But before we can do any of that, we have to begin by splitting this slab down the middle to get the two pieces for the matching benches. It was really important to this client that we were able to get a perfect grain and color match between the two benches. So we were able to find a single slab that was large enough to yield both of the pieces. And something really unique about this piece that you can see in some of these shots is it had these burled spines going all the way down the live edge of this piece, which was perfect for the base layer we're doing because we're not going to hide any of that with the resin pour. So we're going to go a bit quicker with the benches because since they're matching, it's essentially the exact same process as the dining table. So first, we're going to flatten the pieces on our CNC machine. We're going to get them upstairs in the mold and begin mixing up our Black Forest deep resin. We pour a base layer, we pour the top layer, and then after curing for 1 week in the mold, we can get them demolded, back down onto the CNC machine for flattening, and then this is where the pieces start to get a little bit interesting. So the biggest difference between these pieces and the dining table is that the benches are both going to have double waterfalls on them. So it was a little tricky again to find the slabs for this piece because not only did they have to be wide enough to yield both pieces, but they had to be long enough to get the 12-foot length plus the two 17-inch waterfalls going down either side, and all while being nice premium walnut. So this may seem kind of counterintuitive the way we're doing this, how we cut the pieces to length first, now we're sanding them, then we're going to go cut them again, but it is for a good reason. It's just so we can ensure perfect dimension of these pieces before we do cut the 45 and get them glued up. Since we do want to eliminate some of our labor by using this sander, if we were to, let's say, cut the 45s first and then sand them before assembly, we'd be slightly messing up our angle and ruining our perfect fit that we have cut for the joinery. So it is critical to make sure all your pieces are milled to their final thickness or sanded before you go ahead and cut that joinery. And then it's over to our SCM sliding panel saw to cut the 45-degree angles on this piece before we do our waterfall glue up. Now this panel saw is pretty impressive. I believe it's something like 20 years old, and we bought it used, and it has just continued to work and work and work for us. From there, we're installing some dominoes just to give a little bit of alignment and some strength in the joinery here. And for the glue up on this, we are going to have to do a combination of adhesives because there is a combination of materials on here. So for the wooden sections, as you can imagine, we're going to use wood glue. Specifically, we're using Type Bond 3, which is likely overkill because it is an exterior rated glue, but we just like to be sure that things are always going to last. And then for the epoxy sections, we use epoxy. However, it's not the same as what we did for the main pour. We're not using our deep resin. We're using our coat thin resin here because it does only take 24 hours to cure, which is a big benefit. We don't want to have to wait a whole week. But if you use the deep resin, it would likely eventually all end up kind of bleeding out or soaking into the material before it had a chance to cure. And the coat thin is thin enough that you're not going to get air bubbles trapped in there, but thick enough that it's not just all going to pour out and run everywhere while you're trying to do this. So it's kind of the best of both worlds for this application. And then once we've got all our adhesives applied, we've kind of got these custom clamping blocks that are milled at a 45-degree angle so that we can easily just put a clamp straight on there. And then everything stays in the clamps for over 24 hours, especially since we have the epoxy in there, just so we can be sure that we're not going to have any failures in the lamination. Then once the piece is out of the clamps, we can get it sanded up to 320 grit with our Mirka sander. We can use our router to apply a 45-degree bevel to the outside edges. And then after finishing, we can apply 2 coats of our sprayable graphene, and that is a new product in our Black Forest ceramic line. And then it's time to get ready for the delivery, and like the other pieces in this furniture package, we're driving down to Salt Lake City for this, which was an absolutely beautiful drive, so it was a lot of fun to go down there.
Okay, well, we're here this morning at Salt Lake City, Utah, and we're going to install this incredible package that we brought down here for them. Beautiful day.
Table goes in before the base, or base goes in
on top. We gotta get the base in first.
Yeah. And I guess we'll just set them both off to the side, and then once they're in, we'll lift the top onto the base.
We'll put the base kind of right at the back of that wall. When you guys set it, you can go back there.
You're going to be able to flip that upside down.
There we go.
Or flip it over.
Okay. Oh, we can just carry it in while he's unscrewing.
The top's up, eh?
Top is up.
Easy. Yeah, careful on the side.
Once we get up top there, let's flip it up on edge. Once you guys stand it up straight, just grab a handhold wherever you got.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Up she goes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Oh.
Pivot in.
Okay, drive. Drive the bus.
Back up a little bit, guys. Okay. All right. Crunch it through. Keep her upright.
Okay. All right, we're cleared the door. Okay, let's go flat again, guys. Back down the same way. Nice and slow, Bob.
Look at her. All right.
My problem. Alright, we still gotta get her up on its base.
Okay.
Get our base in place so we can just lift it onto it.
Yep, and we'll just pull by the blankets, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll 3, 2, 1.
Light work. Easy though. Yep. Brad, are we on your side?
We're in.
We're in
all of
everywhere.
them. We're perfect.
That's about the easiest one we've ever had.
Well, no, it's I just I want people to eat, so that's the key.
Oh, this isn't secretly here. I think.
Yeah, we'll tip it down onto our fingers this way.
Okay.
Oh, that's not bad.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, so then if you guys get both of these out, then I'll pack the whole trailer up.
So we're good. You back into the other side of the table. Go towards Warren.
One at a time. This could have been sick as a waterfall too. If you did the table waterfall.
It would be insane. I like that you can see the base.
Yeah.
Too.
We consider it a pretty green city, like lots of trees and stuff.
Yeah.
It looks like a desert.
You good? You got it?
Another second, too.
Yep. Okay, you can set it down. I need the tape measure. Okay, and then here is the dining table and the 2 benches. I was actually kind of dumb. I always thought that these benches didn't go with the table. For some reason, I thought they went somewhere else in the house, but this makes way more sense. And we've got Bastogne walnut for the dining table top, Clare walnut, I believe, for these benches, the matching resin, metallic base layer, clear top layer, and this view. Like, this would never get old. Sounds like there's going to be a lot of family members that are going to get to enjoy this piece, and there'll be memories made around this table, so we couldn't ask for something much better. Again, huge thank you to our clients. They were absolutely incredible for trusting us to do this, and we might, if we're lucky, get to build some chairs that go with this table. Okay, we're not done yet. I know that already it seems like a lot. We had the bed, we had the wall art, we had the dining table, we have the benches, but we've saved the best for last. There's one more final piece that goes in this furniture package. It is the most incredible desk that, in my opinion, we've ever built, with one of the most spectacular pieces of wood. Give you guys a little hint, it happens to come from the same tree as the table that we did for Joe Manganello, so you can look forward to seeing that. And I also have to give a thank you to our team here who did an incredible job on all these pieces. The boys absolutely knocked it out of the park. Basically, this whole job was essentially Jack and John did almost everything for this. Some of the other guys helped too, but they were the 2 main players that pulled this thing together, so hats off to them. And if you guys want to see that desk I mentioned, you'll have to stick around till next week. Thank you for watching.
Come use it real quick.
Okay, I got to do it too.
That's not painful.
Oh, they have a big mat.
Oh, that sounds like John. John! Look at this. Oh my God.